And the important thing is the money supply got bigger. Remember, money supply is currency plus deposits, demand deposits. So the deposits have grown by 500,000 just because the Federal Reserve decided to buy $50,000 worth of bonds. So when the Federal Reserve makes a decision to buy bonds, the money supply is going to increase in the overall economy by the amount of 1 over R. So in this example, R was 0.1. So 1 over 0.1 is 10. And so a $50,000 purchase of bonds led to a $500,000 increase in the money supply. Now, obviously, the same thing can happen in reverse. So I'm going to go back to our original example where we had $100,000 in T-bills and $100,000 in reserves at the Federal Reserve Bank. And so these assets were $100,000. And so that only supported $1 million worth of deposits. And we had $150,000 in T-bills. And we had loans of $800,000. So our balance sheet was $1,050,000, and this was $1,050,000. Okay, so now if the Federal Reserve has decided that the money supply is too large and they want it to shrink, now they will sell bonds. So they decide to sell $50,000 worth of bonds to the bank. So they're going to take $50,000 out of their inventory, sell them to the bank. So the bank is going to have now $200,000 in bonds. To pay for those bonds, the bank is going to have to, basically write a check. So the reserves are going to decrease by $50,000, and now the bank's in a situation where they only have $50,000 in reserves, and they don't have enough money to support $1 million worth of loans. Now, in the short run, this is not a problem. There are things that the bank can do to keep itself liquid. There's the federal funds market. There's all sorts of things that are a little bit, though the Mankiw has a nice little piece about what is the Fed funds rate. So you might want to take a look at that because it's of some interest. But the important thing for this example is just realize that over time, the bank is going to shrink. It's going to let its deposits, people withdraw money. They're just not going to try to replace it. And the bank is going to shrink so that we end up in the end with deposits that are only $500,000 because they only have $50,000 in reserves. As loans get paid off, they won't make new loans. Again, they're going to everything has to stay in balance. So we're going to end up with $300,000 in loans. And so in the end, the bank's balance sheet is going to be down to $550,000, and the money supply has shrunk again by $500,000 because the Federal Reserve decided to sell $50,000 worth of bonds. So when the Federal Reserve sells bonds, they sell the bonds to the bank. They take cash out of the bank. Because they've taken cash out of the bank has had to shrink its deposits and its loans, and it's going to be smaller. And so when the Federal Reserve sells bonds, the shrinkage of the overall money supply is again at the rate of 1 over R. And in this case, where R is 0.1, we were assuming a 10% reserve requirement, it'll be 10 times. So when the Federal Reserve sells $50,000 worth of bonds, the money supply is going to shrink by $500,000, 10 times. All right, so that's the monetary chapter. There's plenty more. You should read the chapter and look at the slides, but that's sort of the highlights and the most complicated part. And then now finally the third chapter that we discussed on Monday, which was called Money Growth and Inflation. I'm going to go over some of that too. So, so inflation is we discussed the consumer price index a couple of classes ago. Inflation is an overall rising of prices, which can also be thought of as a decrease in the value of the economy's medium of exchange. So if you think about P as the price level as measured by the CPI, you could think of P as the number of dollars that would be needed to buy a basket of all the goods and services in the economy, that basket, right? So then if we thought 1 over P would be the portion of that basket that $1 could buy, right? So the value of 1 unit of money in terms of that basket of goods and services. So $1 could buy 1 piece of that basket. So if the price level starts to go up, the value of money is going to go down, right? And when the denominator of a fraction goes up, the value of the fraction decreases. And so we can think about 1 over P as sort of the value of the money. We could have a quantity of money, and if you think about the fact that if prices were higher, you would need, if prices were higher, the value of money is going down, you would need to have more money in your pocket on a given moment to buy the stuff you need, or have that money available in your checking account or your debit account, right? If gas is $100 a gallon and you're driving to West Hartford every week to take class, you need a whole lot more money in your bank account to buy that gasoline than if gas were, say, 10 cents a gallon, right? So the higher the price level, the greater the quantity of money you're going to need to have available to you. Now, so this is the demand curve, right? You can just think about higher the prices, the more money you're going to need to have in your pocket. And the supply of money, as we discussed, can be controlled by the Federal Reserve. So the money supply could be thought of as completely inelastic. It's just a policy variable. It's determined by the Federal Reserve. So the price level becomes or 1 over P, the value of the dollar, heats in equilibrium, but it is, as you can see, it's pretty much a function of the Federal Reserve, right? And the idea would be that if the Fed decides to increase the money supply, which is going to lower the value of the dollar, it's going to lead to an increase in the price level. So how does this work? Well, so that's sort of one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is this, and it comes to the same conclusion. I add one more term. This is not one of the magic terms you have to know because it doesn't start with L. But there's one more term that I want you to think about. And that term is velocity. Velocity is defined as the amount of times a particular unit of money turns over within the economy in a particular year. So let's think about this. We have a price level and we have an amount of real GDP. So we're going to use Y to stand for real GDP, or the amount of goods and services produced in the economy multiplied by the price level. We're going to get nominal GDP. Remember when you did that homework a couple weeks ago where we had to calculate nominal GDP, right? The price of the hamburger times the number of hamburgers or whatever it is, right? So now we're thinking about all of the goods and services in the economy, right? All the goods and services produced in the economy times the price of the price level, that's going to become nominal GDP. And then if we divide that by the money supply, it's saying that, okay, the money supply has to turn over, like for us to buy all these goods and services, right? All of them were purchased, right? Or sold, right? Either side, it's the same thing, by this certain amount of money. So all of this, this is what velocity is. Velocity is how big the economy is divided by how big the money supply is So this is a measure of how many times each one of these dollars had to be turned over. Like I bought my soda at the co-op, and the co-op used that money to pay the salary of the cashier, and the cashier used that money to pay her rent, and the landlord used that money to buy a car, and the car dealer used that, blah, blah. Like any particular dollar, you could follow it through the economy over the course of a year and just see how many times it had turned over. That is velocity. Now, if we just do a little algebra here, multiply both sides by m, we can see that mv equals p times y. Now, there's been a lot of research that has been done that suggests that velocity is actually pretty stable over time. It doesn't really change very much. I think somewhere between 4, I think around 4 is the velocity has been pretty stable. And then y, real production, is really a function of supply. The amount of labor, the amount of land, the amount of natural resources, the technology, how much our economy can produce is determined by supply variables, which means that if we change the money supply, all we're going to do is change P, right? Changing the money supply is going to have a proportional impact on P times Y because velocity is constant. But since Y is sort of determined by other things, changing the money supply only changes P. The theory, this is called the quantity theory of money, is that changing the money supply only affects inflation. The Federal Reserve may try to get the economy moving again by increasing the money supply, trying to get more goods and services being produced. But in the end, they're going to fail. That in the long run, at least, changing the money supply does nothing but change the level of prices. And one of the ideas around from the quantity theory of money is that inflation is at all times and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. This school of thought is also known as the classical dichotomy, which somewhat declares that there are two kinds of variables in the economy. There are the nominal variables, prices, interest rates, that are basically a function of money and how things are, we sort of keep track. And then there are the real variables. The real things like how much production there really is, how many cars are being produced, how many people are actually working, how many hours are they working, how much oil are we able to extract from the ground. There's a distinction between the classical and between the real and the nominal, and the reason they call it dichotomy is the idea that changing one of the nominal variables, such as the amount of money, is not going to affect the real economy. This is also known as monetary neutrality. And as we'll see next week or so, monetary neutrality may be true in the long run. It probably is true in the long run. But in the short run, it's not true. That in fact, some of the things that are done in the short run to use some of the monetary tools to help the real economy grow faster, they actually sometimes kind of work. But that's a lesson for another day. So I urge you to read the book. I also want you to look at, make sure you look at all the slides and go to the end. I've skipped over a number of things, and particularly at the end, slide 82, which is around hyperinflation, slide 83, which is around the Fisher effect, and slide 85, which discusses the costs of inflation, which is the last slide in the whole lecture. You really want to look at those. But look at all the slides and read the book, and if you have any questions, obviously you can call me, text me, email me, and I will definitely see you in class on Monday. Thank you for your attention.